So what are we doing underneath the truck?
So today we are servicing trucks, so we are checking to make sure that the driveline bolts are all in and making sure that all the wires are not just hanging down and hooked up to where they're supposed to be. So first thing you want to do is check this one right here. And you want to push up on it, make sure it has no play in it, make sure the bolts are still attached, make sure the U-bolts are good, and then just follow the driveline down. You want to make sure these carriage bolts are tightened down and this ain't hanging. And then same thing with all the other bolts to the driveline. You want to make sure that they're in and snug and not loose. And then you want to check all your air lines and wires, make sure that they're all snugged up and everything so that way they're not falling down, catching anything. Now when you get over here, you want to check your brake lines, make sure they're not cut or seized or anything. Make sure that wires ain't hanging down. And then you got to check the brakes, make sure that the pads ain't worn. And as you walk down, you want to check the rest of the drive lines, make sure that they're good, make sure they're not loose. Check your airbags, make sure that they're not leaking or cracked. Alright, so now we're going to check the tires, make sure the tread's evenly worn, make sure there's no flat spots, make sure there's nothing that we can see inside the tires, make sure they're not flat. And then when you're checking the PSI on the tires, you want it to 100 to 110. So we're at 100. We're at 100, so those two are good. Now just keep on going, check them, make sure they're not flat. So first thing we're going to do is turn it on the test mode to turn on all the lights so that way we can walk down and check them all. So while you're walking out of the trailer, you want to make sure it still has all the hooks and they're not broken off. Make sure these ain't bent or anything like that. Got to check the boxes, make sure they're not falling off or anything. And then same thing with the tires. We got to check them, make sure that they're not out of round or anything. Make sure they have no flat spots on them. And these ones are grease, so they won't have oil inside of them. So you just check the lines, make sure that they're tight. Then when you're walking around, you want to make sure the ABS light ain't staying on. If it is, then you have ABS problems.
And what does ABS mean?
So ABS is your brake system, so it'll tell you if one of the sensors are bad or if one of the wires are shorting out and it's not getting the connection to the truck it's supposed to.
Okay.
So now we're going to do the same thing we did with the truck up front. We're going to check the airbags, make sure they're not cracked or leaking. Check the struts, make sure they're not leaking. You'll see it'll be wet right here if they are leaking and going bad. So these are disc brakes, so you got to look inside and check and make sure that you still have enough brake pad on them. Then you also want to make sure that all these lines are tied up the way they are. So if anything's touching it, it has to have a zip tie. If not, then it's a DOT violation. So you just want to double check those. Make sure all your air lines and everything are connected, not leaking. And same thing, they gotta be zip tied if they're touching. Now I also like to come up, check tire carrier, make sure the bolts ain't loose, make sure your chain's around the tire. Make sure it's not cracked or bent.
And this is a spare tire?
Yes, this is a spare tire to the trailer.
Awesome.